I heard it through the screen door. My daughter was standing in her own kitchen, laughing, and she said, "Honestly, at this point, I'm just waiting for her to need a home. Then at least she becomes someone else's problem." The laugh that followed belonged to my son-in-law. I was standing on the back step with a foil-covered pan of butter tarts, still warm from my oven, the kind I'd been making since before my daughter knew how to hold a fork. I'd driven 40 minutes in November sleet because she'd texted that morning, "Coming for dinner Sunday?" and I had said yes before I'd even finished reading it. I didn't knock. I stood there long enough to make sure I hadn't misheard. Then I set the pan down on the step, got back in my car, and drove home. I didn't cry until I reached the highway, and even then it wasn't the kind of crying that empties you out. It was the other kind, the kind that clarifies. By the time I got home, I knew what I was going to do. I've been widowed 11 years. Gerald died in February, the kind of February that feels personal, and I have managed everything since then on my own. The house in Barry, the investments, the RRSP I rolled into a rife at 65, the car, the furnace, the flooding in the basement, 2 winters ago that I handled with a shop vac and a very patient plumber named Bill who called me boss and meant it. I am not a woman who needs rescuing. But I had been acting like one. Not in the practical sense, in the softer sense, the kind where you keep showing up somewhere you're not wanted because you can't stop hoping that next time will be different. My daughter is 41, her name is not important here. What is important is that she is the only child I have, that I loved her with everything I had, and that somewhere in the last decade she had started treating me the way people treat furniture they're not sure they want to keep. Her husband, I will call my son-in-law, because that is all he is to me now. I have 2 grandchildren, a boy of 14 and a girl of 9. The girl still hugged me when she saw me. The boy had started doing that thing teenagers do where they look slightly past you, like you're a smudge on the window they're trying to see through. None of that was why I left. I left because of what I heard. Because when you are standing on someone's back step holding butter tarts you made at 6 in the morning and you hear yourself described as a problem to be managed, something reorganizes itself inside you. Not dramatically, quietly, like a drawer finally sliding shut. That night I made soup, chicken and barley the long way. I let it go for 3 hours because I had nowhere to be and nothing to perform. I ate at my own table, alone, and I did not check my phone once. My daughter texted at 8:15, "You said you were coming." We waited. I put the phone face down on the counter. In the morning, I called my financial advisor. Her name is Bridget, and she has worked with me for 6 years. She is the kind of woman who asks good questions and then actually listens to the answers. I told her I wanted to review my entire estate plan, all of it, who had signing authority, who was listed as beneficiary, who held my power of attorney. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Can you come in Thursday?" I could. That week I also called my family doctor and asked for a referral to update my advance care directive. In Ontario, that's the document that tells the hospital who speaks for you if you can't speak for yourself. My daughter's name was on it. I had put it there 8 years ago without thinking twice, the way you do things when you still believe that family is the same as safe. I was starting to understand the difference. Thursday came cold and bright. I wore the navy wool coat I bought myself 3 winters ago, the one my daughter had said made me look like a school principal. I had taken that as a compliment. I wore it on purpose. Bridget's office is on Bayfield Street. She had a pot of coffee going and a yellow notepad, and she looked at me over the rim of her reading glasses and said, "Talk to me." So I did. I told her what I heard. I told her about the tarts on the step. I told her about 11 years of driving 40 minutes each way for dinners, where I was sat at the end of the table nearest the recycling bin. I told her about the Christmas 2 years ago when my son-in-law had announced they were going to start doing a smaller, more intentional holiday. And what that had meant, practically, was that I was invited for 2 hours on the 27th, after his family had left. Bridget listened. Then she opened the folder. My daughter was listed as primary beneficiary on my RIF, my life insurance policy through Sun Life, and my non-registered investment account. She held my continuing power of attorney for property. She was also the executor of my will. That's a lot of trust to place in someone who describes you as a problem. We spent 2 hours going through it. Bridget was clear and careful. She told me I could change beneficiary designations directly with the institutions, no lawyer required for most of them. The POA was different. I'd need to revoke it formally and sign a new one, which meant seeing a notary or a lawyer. My will needed a full revision if I wanted to change the executor. She gave me names, a wills and estates lawyer named Gordon on Dunlop Street, who she had worked with for years and trusted. I wrote it down. I want to remove her from everything, I said. Bridget nodded like she had heard this before. Probably she had. We'll start with what we can do today, she said. By the time I left, the beneficiary designations on my RIF and life insurance had been changed to the Barry Women and Children's Shelter, a place I had volunteered with for 4 years in the early 2000s, back when I needed somewhere to put my hands that felt useful. The non-registered account would take a few more steps. We scheduled a follow-up for the following week. I walked to my car slowly. The cold felt good. Claire. My daughter called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Mum, I don't know why you didn't come Sunday. We had your chair set and everything. Can you just call me? The kids were asking. I played it once, then I deleted it. I had a hard time sleeping that night, not because I was sad, but because my mind kept running through the list of things I still needed to do. I wrote them down on a notepad on the nightstand. Gordon the lawyer, the TD account, my advance care directive, the front door deadbolt I'd been meaning to replace for a year. I added that too. Sleep came around midnight. It was better than it had been in months. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner, which I find comforting. Gordon was in his early 60s, trim, with reading glasses pushed up on his head, and the unhurried manner of someone who has sat with people in difficult moments many times and knows there is no rushing it. I want to revoke my existing power of attorney and draft a new one, I told him, and I want to change my executor and revise my will. He nodded. Who do you have in mind? I'd thought about this. There is a woman from my book club, Anna Marie, who is a retired chartered accountant and the most organized human being I have ever met. She had once reorganized the entire refreshment rota for our group and sent a spreadsheet that was frankly better than most things I'd seen in 30 years of classroom administration. I trusted her. More importantly, she was not waiting for me to become someone else's problem. I also listed my friend Shirley, who I have known since our daughters were in the same kindergarten class, as an alternate. Shirley is blunt in the way that feels like a gift when you are surrounded by people who are being carefully polite. Gordon drafted the revocation of the existing POA and prepared a new document naming Anna Marie as my attorney for property and Shirley as alternate. He also began drafting a new will. It would take a few days to finalize, but I signed the revocation before I left. When I walked out, something shifted in my posture. I noticed it only because the woman at the front desk looked up and smiled at me differently than she had when I walked in, like I looked like someone who had just made a decision. That evening my son-in-law called. I didn't know he had my number, or I had forgotten. He left a message. Hey there. Listen, Kathleen mentioned you didn't come Sunday, and she's pretty upset. I just wanted to reach out and say, we want you to be part of the family. Whatever's going on, I hope we can work it out. Give us a call. I listened to it standing in my kitchen with my coat still on. We want you to be part of the family. I had been part of this family for 41 years. I had driven that man to the airport at 4 in the morning when Kathleen was in labour because their regular car was in the shop. I had flown to Halifax with 3 days' notice when their son was hospitalised with croup, and my daughter had needed someone there. I had lent them $11,000 during COVID, when his business had a bad quarter, and I had never asked about it since. I deleted the voicemail. The next morning I called a locksmith. He came the same afternoon, a young man from a company on Esser Road. He replaced the deadbolt on the front door and the lock on the side entrance. He gave me 4 keys. One went in my coat pocket, one in the fireproof box in the bedroom closet, one to Anna-Marie, one to Shirley. I slept with the windows cracked that night even though it was November. The cold air felt honest. On Saturday, Anna-Marie came by. I hadn't told her everything on the phone, just that I was going through some legal updates and wanted to name her in a document. She showed up with a bag of groceries because that is who she is, and I made us omelettes and told her the whole story over breakfast. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she put her fork down and said, "Good, you should have done this a year ago." That was all. No drama, no soothing, no but family is complicated, just good. She accepted the role. We shook hands like it was a business meeting, which it was, and also wasn't. My granddaughter called that Sunday. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first because she'd lowered it slightly, the way kids do when they're trying to sound serious. "Grandma, it's me. Are you okay? Mum said you've been acting weird." I told her I was fine, more than fine. She said you missed dinner on purpose. I said I did. A pause. Then, how come? I thought about how to answer this to a 9-year-old. I said, sometimes when people say something hurtful, even if they don't know you heard it, you have to decide whether to keep showing up to the same place and hoping they'll change, or whether to spend that time somewhere it's better used. Another pause, like what you said about not pouring from an empty cup. I had said that to her once 2 years ago when she was upset about a friend at school. I hadn't remembered she'd kept it. "Yes," I said, "exactly like that." She asked if she could still see me. I said, of course, just come to my house. Call me first. She said okay. Then she said, "Mum's going to be mad that I called you." I said, "I know. You did it anyway. That matters." She hung up quietly, the way kids do when they don't know what they're feeling but know it's real. Kathleen showed up on Tuesday. I heard her car pull in and I stayed at the kitchen table with my tea. She knocked twice, then tried the door handle, which no longer opened for her, and then knocked again harder. I opened the door. She was in her work clothes, which meant she had come here directly from the office, which meant this was planned, and she had been building toward it since morning. I recognized this. It was something she had done since she was a teenager, the long runway of a grievance. "You changed the locks," she said. I did. Why? She didn't wait for an answer. She stepped past me into the front hall. I let her. I closed the door. She stood in the living room and looked around with that expression I had come to know so well over the past decade, the one that took inventory and found things wanting. "You missed Sunday dinner and you didn't call and you've been ignoring us for 2 weeks, and now I'm hearing from your lawyer that you've been making changes to your estate. What is going on with you?" How does she know about Gordon? Probably Bridget, who had sent paperwork, or Gordon's office, who had sent something requiring acknowledgement. It didn't matter. I said, "I heard you, Kathleen, 2 weeks ago on your back step. The screen door was closed, but the window was open. I heard what you said to Derek about me." She stared at me. "What did I say?" It wasn't a question. I told her, word for word, I have a very good memory. I always have. She didn't deny it. She looked at the floor. Then she said, "I was just venting. You know how Derek and I talk. You can't take one private conversation and just—" "It wasn't one conversation," I said. "It was the shape of how you've seen me for a while now. That conversation just said it plainly." She looked up. "So you're punishing me. You're punishing the kids." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making decisions about my own life, which I am entitled to do." "You're changing your will. You're removing me. I know you are." "Yes." "Why?" "Because," I said calmly, "the way I used to speak to 30 students at once when the room was getting away from me, I have spent 11 years showing up. And the most honest thing you said about how you feel was the thing you said when you thought I couldn't hear you. I'd rather build a life that reflects reality than keep performing one that doesn't." She crossed her arms. "Everything I've done for you." I waited. "I check on you. I invite you for dinners." I said nothing. She stopped herself. The silence sat there. "You can't cut me out over one bad day." "Over 11 years that finally had a bad day out loud," I said. She picked up her bag. Her jaw was tight in the way that meant she was working through whether to escalate. I had seen that look before. I waited. "Finally, when you've calmed down and want to have a real conversation, you know where we are." "I do," I said, "and you know where I am." She left. I sat back down with my tea, which had gone cold. I heated it up and drank it anyway. That night I cried, not a lot, but I let it happen. I gave myself 20 minutes. I set the timer on the stove. Then I washed my face, poured a small glass of Shiraz, and sat at the kitchen table with the notepad. The list was getting shorter. I crossed things off one by one. The following week, Gordon called to say the new will was ready for signing. He read me through the key changes. My estate would go primarily to the Barry Women and Children's Shelter and to a bursary I was establishing at the school board where I had worked for 28 years for students who needed support with post-secondary costs. Anna Marie was named executor. There was a small personal bequest to Shirley and separately a trust for my granddaughter, administered by Anna Marie, payable when she turned 25. Not to my grandson. Not yet. He hadn't called. The door wasn't closed, but it wasn't propped open either. I signed everything with my reading glasses on and my good pen. When I left the office, I stopped at the cafe downstairs and ordered a butter tart. It was from a chain and not as good as mine, but I ate it standing at the counter and tasted it properly. Things I had not done in years, just tasting something slowly, just being somewhere without checking whether everyone else was comfortable first. My granddaughter came the following Saturday with her overnight bag and a library book about horses, which she was very serious about. She slept in the guest room, and in the morning I let her help me make French toast. She stood on a step stool even though she was tall enough not to need it, because she liked being the same height as me. I didn't say anything about it. We ate at the table by the window and talked about her class trip to Ottawa and her best friend's new dog and how she wanted to take swimming lessons at the Barry Aquatics Club. She didn't ask about her mother. I didn't bring her up. After lunch we went to Kempenfelt Bay and walked the waterfront. It was cold but bright, that particular light you get in Ontario in late November that slants across the water at a low angle and makes everything look like it's been thought about. She ran ahead and then doubled back like a dog who can't decide between two good smells. On the walk back to the car, she slicked her hand into mine without saying anything. I let her. That was enough for that day. I had moved, not because I was running, because I had looked around my house of 31 years and understood that it had been serving mostly as an address where people knew to look for me. A place to find me, I wanted to be somewhere I had chosen, not somewhere I had stayed. I found a condo on the south end of Barry, 1 bedroom plus a den, 8th floor, with a window above the kitchen sink that looked west across the rooftops toward the bay. The building had a community room with a book exchange and a small gym I had no intention of using, and a concierge desk where a man named Freddie recognized me after my 2nd week and started having my package slips ready before I asked. I liked it immediately. I liked that everything in it was mine, by decision, not by accumulation. Anna Marie and Shirley helped me move in a Saturday. Shirley narrated the entire process like a sports commentator. Anna Marie kept a running inventory on her phone. I fed them leftover soup and good bread at the end of the day, and we sat on the floor because the chairs hadn't been unwrapped yet, and we laughed about something, I don't remember what. The kind of laughing that happens when the work is done and everyone is tired and it feels like enough. A week after I settled in, I got a letter from Kathleen, handwritten, which surprised me. She has her father's handwriting, slanted to the right. She said she had thought about what I'd said. She said she knew she hadn't been fair. She said she was sorry for the things I'd heard and for the other things she hadn't known I'd noticed. She said she missed me. She asked, near the end of the page, if she could call. I read it twice. Then I put it in the drawer of the side table, the one where I keep things I'm not ready to decide about. Not a no, not yet a yes. It was my granddaughter who told me without knowing she was telling me something. She came for tea one afternoon in December, and we were sitting at my small table with the view of the rooftops, and she was telling me about a project at school where she had to interview someone about their life, and she said, "I want to interview you. Mum said I should ask Dad's mum, but I want to ask you." I said, "Why?" She looked at me like I was being slightly slow. "Because you're interesting. Because things happened to you and you decided what to do about them." I thought about what she had said later after she left. You decided what to do about them. She was 9. She had watched whatever had happened in our family over these past months and drawn the line from event to decision to outcome and called it interesting, called it worth asking about. Some mornings I still woke with a hollow feeling. I would lay there in my new bedroom, the ceiling unfamiliar above me, and I'd miss things that weren't real anymore, the version of Sunday dinners I had imagined rather than the ones that had actually happened. Gerald, the family I had thought we were building, and that turned out to have a different floor plan than the one I'd read. Those feelings I let have their 20 minutes, maybe 30. Then I got up and made coffee and stood at the window above the sink and watched the light come in from the west, which is not technically how morning light works, but it had its own logic at this height, the way it bounced off other buildings and arrived sideways and soft. My granddaughter did interview me eventually. She came with a handmade list of questions on a piece of paper she'd folded and unfolded, so many times it was soft at the creases. She asked me what I was proudest of. She asked me what I would tell my younger self. She asked me what I'd learned about being treated well. I thought about that one. I said, I learned it late, but I learned that the people who truly want to be with you don't make you feel like you arrived without an invitation. And I learned that once you know the difference, you can't unknow it. She wrote it down, carefully, with a pencil. She looked up. Is that what happened with Mum? I looked at her. She was watching me with the steady eyes of someone who has already thought about this and just wants to know if the adult will tell her the truth. Yes, I said, something like that. She nodded. She wrote something else on her paper, something I couldn't read upside down. Then she clicked her pencil and said, "Okay, one more. What does it feel like now?" I looked at the window, the rooftops, the pale sky of a February afternoon in Barre, the kind Gerald always said looked like someone had turned the saturation down. "It feels like a room that's been aired out," I said. after a long time with the windows closed. She wrote that down too. I did not hear from Kathleen for 3 months. Then in February she called, a Thursday evening, and I answered on the second ring. She asked if we could meet. Not at her house, somewhere neutral. She named a cafe on Dunlop, not far from Gordon's office, as it happened. We met on a Saturday. She was already there when I arrived, which is not how she usually does things, and I understood that it was an offering of some kind. She had ordered 2 teas, peppermint for her, Earl Grey for me, because she still remembered, and that meant something. We sat for almost 2 hours. She did not apologize again. I didn't need her to. She talked about things she had noticed herself doing that she hadn't liked. She talked about her father, which she rarely does, and what his absence had done to how she moved through the world. She talked about Derek in a way that was honest and not flattering, and I could see that it had cost her something. I listened. I told her some things I had not said before, not in anger, just plainly, what the December 27th had felt like, what it meant to bring food somewhere and have no one take the dish. We paid for our own teas. We walked out onto Dunlop together and stood at the corner, and I don't know what she expected, but I said, "I'm glad you called." She looked at me. Her eyes were tired. Me too. We didn't hug. We walked in different directions. I am not pretending that afternoon fixed something. Some things don't get fixed. They get acknowledged, and that is a different and sometimes better outcome. I don't know what Kathleen and I will be to each other going forward. I know what we will not be, the performance of closeness that we'd been doing for a decade, where she kept the door open just wide enough, and I kept walking through it and pretending the gap was fine. The door is different now. I don't know its exact dimensions yet. I'm measuring as I go. My granddaughter spent part of March break with me. She brought her horse book and a new one about ocean navigation. She slept in the den on the pull-out sofa and complained cheerfully about the bar in the middle of the mattress, which I promised to have fixed. In the mornings we made eggs, and she showed me a card game she'd learned at school that I was terrible at for 3 rounds, and then inexplicably won, which delighted her beyond proportion. On the last morning she stood in the doorway with her bag and looked at the room like she was memorizing it. "Same time next break?" she asked. I said, "The door is always open, just knock." She grinned. "Even with the new locks?" "Especially," I said, "with the new locks." After she left, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the window above the sink, the light coming in sideways the way it did, landing on the counter in a pale stripe. I had a list on the fridge of things I wanted to do this spring: a watercolor class at the library, volunteer orientation at the shelter. They'd asked me to come back. A road trip to Tobermory in May, just myself and the car in the Georgian Bay. I thought about what my granddaughter had asked, sitting at my table with her pencil and her soft creased paper. What does it feel like now? It feels like knowing that you are the one who decides what the day is for. Not a child anymore, not a guest, not a problem someone is waiting to hand off. Just a woman with a good coat and a new set of keys and a window that faces west. Some days that is everything. There's a particular kind of hurt that doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives the way cold does through an old window. You don't notice it until you've already been sitting in it too long. I stood on that back step for maybe 30 seconds, long enough to hear my daughter laugh after what she said, long enough to understand that the words weren't a slip or a bad moment. They were just the thing she had been thinking, said out loud in a room she believed was private. What I did next surprised even me. I didn't cry on the driveway. I didn't knock and confront her. I set the butter tarts down and I drove home, and somewhere on that highway I understood something that I think I had known for a long time but hadn't been willing to look at directly. that I had been showing up for a version of my daughter that existed mostly in my own hope, that the gap between who she was and who I kept expecting her to be had been costing me, quietly, for years. There's a cause and effect to how these things unfold, and I've thought about it a lot since then. It wasn't one afternoon that built to that moment on the step. It was 11 years of small signals I explained away. Every Christmas 27th, every dinner where I was positioned near the recycling bin, every unanswered call, every time I told myself she was just tired or busy or going through something. I had been so focused on keeping the peace that I stopped noticing the peace wasn't real. It was just managed distance with a pleasant surface. What I had to learn, and it took me longer than it should have, was that good judgment is not the same as loyalty. For a long time I confused them. I thought staying meant I was faithful. What it actually meant was that I had stopped thinking clearly about what the situation was asking me to accept. Clarity, honest, clear-eyed clarity about what was actually happening in front of me, was the thing I had been avoiding because it was uncomfortable. Once I stopped avoiding it, everything else followed naturally. The practical steps, calling Bridget, walking into Gordon's office, changing the locks, signing the new will, none of those were acts of anger. They were acts of thinking. They required me to sit down with my own life and assess it the way I would assess anything else I was responsible for. What is here? What is not? What needs to change? I had spent decades being organized and clear-headed in every other area of my life. It turned out I could do the same for this. And then there was the part that nobody talks about much, the part that required something quieter and harder than any legal document. That was getting up each day and not collapsing back into the old pattern, not answering texts out of guilt, not reopening doors that needed to stay closed for a while, not performing okayness for people who had not earned the performance. That took a kind of daily resolve I hadn't known I had. It still does. Some mornings I wake up with that hollow feeling and I give it its time, and then I make my coffee and I stand at the window and I choose the day again. My granddaughter asked me what it felt like now, sitting at my kitchen table with her pencil and her soft creased paper. I told her it felt like a room that had been aired out. That was true. But the fuller truth is that it feels like finally knowing the difference between staying because you want to and staying because you are afraid of what leaving means. I know which one I was doing before. I know which one I am doing now. Some things don't heal into what they were. They heal into something more honest, and that is worth more, even when it costs more to get there.